Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is John Horvat II, who's a scholar, researcher, educator, and international speaker, and author whose works have appeared worldwide. For nearly 2 decades, he has researched, written, and lectured on the causes and solutions of America's socio-economic decline, an effort that has culminated in the landmark release of this new book, Return to Order. He heads the Tradition Family Property Commission for American Studies and lives near York, Pennsylvania. Mr. Horvat, welcome to the program.
Great to be on the show.
This book is a very interesting read for a couple of reasons. One, the style of language is so clear and articulate. I'm really impressed with your writing style, but also the sense you have of how we got to this socioeconomic crisis that you discuss in Return to Order. I like the subtitle, From a Frenzied Economy to an Organic Christian Society, because that sort of takes us both with the problem and the solution. But I'd like to talk about, especially in some detail, about what has happened to America. You describe in the introduction that we're like a cruise ship, and the system is breaking down, and we need to get back on course.
Right. I think the cruise ship metaphor is really pretty accurate, because we're in a cruise ship economy where all the boutiques are full and the restaurants are bustling and the gambling's taking place, and everything seems all right. But when you go below the surface, below the decks, and on the horizon, there's a storm coming, and people aren't really looking at it and really seeing what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. I think this is pretty much our situation today. The economy looks all right, but there's a lot of problems below. Mm-hmm.
And the commission that has made this study, this landmark study, based out of the American Society for Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property.
Right, exactly. Yes, go ahead.
It is motivated by a love of God and country, and is concerned that we've lost our virtues, our values that the economy was once rooted in.
Right, exactly. I mean, all too often people make a distinction between economy and moral values. And, of course, you can't really do that. The two belong together. The two come together. Adam Smith, who was the father of modern economy, he was not an economist. He was a moral philosopher. Mm-hmm. And, we need to have those two things put together, and that's what I try to do in Return to Order.
Mm-hmm. And in the dominant American model, as you call it, there are two main elements, and one is this vibrant economic system that churns out material comfort and well-being, and the other is this American way of life where we enjoy the fruits of production and having this dream that everyone must have a maximum amount of freedom to pursue their personal happiness as long as it doesn't interfere with somebody else's dream. And that's part of the problem, is it not?
Right. I mean, we have a contradictory, it's almost a paradox of sorts, because we are hardworking. We have a very robust economy, an excellent economy that has produced enormous amounts of goods. But at the same time, we have this, what I call frenetic intemperance, that throws this system out of balance and causes it to crash and on occasion, and causes all sorts of problems in society and our culture as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about frenetic intemperance a little bit. I love the term, first of all, but we really do live in an age of hyper-consumerism. And what is at the heart of all that? You talk about that and how it's sort of led us astray from what really matters.
Right. It's this desire to have everything instantly now, regardless of the consequences. And it's something that is tearing our society and our culture apart. It's eroding our faith. And so it is this phenomena of just a culture that is constantly pushing to people to consume, to have it now.
Mm-hmm. Say a bit about the co-op mentality that leads us to act as if our connection to country is like a membership of benefits.
Right. I mean, America, we are a country that is sort of organized like a co-op or a stock company, where there is a mentality of, well, I'll buy into America for what I can get from it. Mm-hmm. And it is not. It is a dominating mentality that as long as the going's good, everyone's happy. But when things start breaking down or things don't go well, it leads to resentments, entitlements, all sorts of social problems. A nation should be more like a family and not like a company. And I think there are a lot of Americans who do have a very patriotic and family-like relationship with America, but there is this dominant idea of the co-op, which is it comes from our way back in our history.
So we've got this great abundance and this way of life that people are pursuing, but a lot of people want to lay this at the feet of capitalism, and you want to make sure that we understand that that's not what you're doing here.
Absolutely, capitalism is not the problem. The word itself is not well defined. There's no real definition for it, and it is an expression used by the left. I mean, and following the good example of a good general, I would say let's not use their terms. Let's just stay away from it and say free market. Free market is a good thing, and we need a free market. And that's what will help us in our prosperity. So I tend to stay away from the term.
And you do mention that it's an ambiguous term, and I know that in one of the papal encyclicals of John Paul II, he talked about an economic system that recognizes the fundamental and positive role of business, the market, and private property, talking about what can be good about that.
Right. I mean, he was not. Everyone thinks that somebody who is religious and thinks about spiritual things is necessarily contrary to the materialism or materialistic, things that are material. But that's not so. John Paul II, as you mentioned, said, well, no, it has its good aspects. It does help society. It does help the poor, etc. But it also has its problems, like any system. So, it's a very balanced way of looking at it, and I think we have to maintain that balance.
So the factor that makes us reckless is that frenetic intemperance, the explosive, relentless drive for throwing off restraint and gratifying passions. And you refer to it at some point as a faulty accelerator, and I kind of like that. It's almost like an addiction of sorts.
Right, exactly. I mean, you see it in our in the business world. The very good example is the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, but you see it in our daily lives and our hectic lifestyles and the investment mechanisms. They're just nanoseconds, logarithms that work throughout our systems. I mean, all these things are a reflection of a mechanistic, a system that takes the human element out and just goes for the money, basically.
And we have had on this show an author who talks about how public health is at risk in the case of some of the hyper-consumerism being promoted by various industries. And so there's a lot more to this than just what's going on spiritually in terms of the material costs. But one of the things that you are concerned about in the book is that we maximize profits by collaborating with socialist or communist governments, and they destroy the free market.
Right. I mean, the free market is wonderful as long as it's, we follow the rules. And a lot of times this frenetic intemperance breaks the rules by relationships with corrupt relationships or outsourcing our industry to these communist nations, which do not deal fairly, and we're not on a level playing field.
So as we started throwing off restraint in the Industrial Revolution, what can you say about that contributing to this?
Right. I mean, I trace this all the way back to the Industrial Revolution because that was the period when this frenetic intemperance began to dominate in our modern economy. I'm not against technology. I'm not against industry. But the way in which it was done was something that was very frenetic, and it had the effect of overturning and a lot of the social and moral restraints that did exist. I think that we could have advanced just as far as we are today had we not done that, had we kept a balance. And so this is where I trace it to the Industrial Revolution.
And you even mentioned that the Industrial Revolution's destabilizing changes were part of the grounds for Karl Marx's theory about class struggle and so on.
Right. I mean, it set the groundwork, and it really was a massive change in society that didn't need to happen. And it was the image I use is a rider on the horse. It's the technology and industry is made to be the servant of man, not man to be the servant of technology and industry. And it's what we've seen is a situation where the rider has fallen off the horse with his foot in the stirrup, and he's being dragged around.
And part of this massive expansion also enthroned some other people to which we have to respond: a ruling elite, bankers, businessmen, technocrats with powers and fortunes and privileges that we are bound to.
Right. I mean, there are. This did bring about a social imbalance as well, in not only just the production imbalance in production, and it created a vicious circle in the line of super production, super consumption, advertising, all these very that led to the what I call the creation of false elites, not the true elites.
Okay, so here's this drive toward the huge, the gigantic, and I think today of what it costs to elect someone to national office, and how much money is being poured into those campaigns, as one of the ways in which we've gotten too big and too devoted to giganticism. Yeah,
giganticism is definitely out there, and it's invading all fields. It absorbs so many things. And your example, I think, is quite correct. And by doing that, it takes away that human element, whereby one cannot deal with it it just becomes too big for a person to deal with the situations in which we're in. And so, definitely, I'm not against big companies, but when they become extremely gigantic and inefficient, then they shouldn't be sustained.
Yeah, and you mentioned an overly fat person might take expensive medicine to stay alive and grow, and a bodybuilder might use steroids to appear more muscular, but that's part of the frenetic intemperance and the impatience of growing at appropriate rate.
Right, you have an unnatural growth, lot of times sustained by government and government subsidies for big industry, that would not exist had there been a level playing field and a more natural situation dominate.
So we get this unbalanced market, and then giganticism marries to the global culture, and now we've got more problems than we can count.
That's for sure. I mean, we've globalized our economy. Not that global trade shouldn't exist, but by doing that, we've lost a lot of the what I call the organicity of the economy, where the products are local, have some kind of characteristics of the people who make them. Now it's just everybody's in everything. A person pretty much has to compete with the world because everything's so linked.
And that link is also leading to a kind of blandness that you refer to in terms of standardization.
Right, yeah. Exactly. I mean, everybody talks about diversity, but what you have today is everyone eats the same, dresses the same, listens to the same music. So much sameness that is out there that you lose that local characteristic that makes life very interesting. When you have this frenetic intemperance, you have mass society, mass media, mass everything.
And then there's this revolution that goes on, a kind of an imposed revolution, as economists like to present the modern market, where there's this, and I guess Adam Smith is one of the sources you cite there about the invisible hand made possible by the force of the state's quite visible iron fist.
Right. I mean, a lot of these policies of, that everybody says has sort of spontaneously come up. Many times it is in conjunction with academia, with government policy. That a real economy should not be dominated by government policy or these forces. But that's what's pretty much happened.
Mm-hmm. And you also address early on how part of what the free market was trying to get free of was not just freedom from the state, but also from the Catholic Church.
Right. That was somewhat, I was very surprised to find that in my research.
Mm-hmm.
But the modern economy is very much, in the beginning, they tried to separate the moral values from the economic values. And we see even that today, that they see moral values as a restraint to the free market, as something that is harmful toward it. And this is something I think is wrong, that we need to keep those. That's what keeps economy in balance. You may have more production on the short term, but in the long term, you end up destroying the economy by taking away the influences of family, faith, and community.
Mm-hmm. So the moral responsibility that disappears as we look at these trends, what is at the cause of that? Is it really rooted back in the frenetic intemperance?
Right. It is this sort of this frenetic intemperance that is deep inside the soul of modern man. That is not. It is not only an economic problem, but it is mirrored in in society, in academia, and a lot of the areas where we that man exists. It is something that's mirrored there. This idea: I need to be free of any restraints. I need to be free of any identity. I need to be free from so many things, because it is this urge to simply throw off any type of restraint that I think is behind our economic problem as well.
Mm-hmm. And so let's add to the acceleration now by talking about the consequences of the abuse of technology, the computers, the iPods, the iPads, the iPhones, the novelties that are so much a part of our society today.
Right. I mean, they're all out there. You see them. It's just something that really, when I talk to people, that's one of the things they connect with, saying, well, how our technology has dominated us. Everybody's that human connection that is so important for society and economy is being lost. We're connecting with everybody, but we're not necessarily communicating. Mm-hmm. And we don't have that very essential face-to-face communication that is so essential.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. I was reading this part about the brutal pace and how it sort of we get an unbridled appetite for greater speeds and sensations, and it becomes almost a dependency. And I was charged to close up the church Sunday, and there was a kid downloading a program, and his mother said, "Come on, we got to go. We got to lock up the church." And he got mad and frustrated and started crying because he said, "Now I'll have to wait a whole hour to download this because I have to start over." And he was upset about losing an hour of download time. And the next week, I lost my cell phone, and I was in a panic. How will I get all my directory back? And it's just, I can see withdrawal symptoms in people around me from this.
Yeah, we're all very much connected to that, and it is something that is a matter of concern. We need to put our priorities in the right place and put technology in its right place. Use it for what when necessary. Let it serve us, and let it help make our life easier. But we should not be serving technology and developing this dependency, like you said, mm-hmm. on it.
Yeah, and then there's individualism. Let's talk about that a little bit. The rise of individualism.
Right. I mean, the individualism is very much part of our history. I mean, it goes back all the way to Locke and a lot of the early Enlightenment, English Enlightenment writers. But it is this idea that I am the center of the world, and I exist, for my own self-gratification, and I enter into contract with others to maybe make my situation better. But I really don't have concern for others as people, as fellow Christians. This is the type of thing that individualism does. It takes away that human element that makes us a society and a social being, and this is often lost. And so everything is just, let's say, centered upon my feelings, on my pleasures, my way of being.
Mm-hmm. And that leads, in your discussion of postmodern individualism, to what happened in the 60s with a revolution, as you put it, that heads toward decadence.
Right, and ordinary individualism, leads to a type of society that's like a co-op, But the 60s actually went a step further and said, well, we will. My individualism goes to the point where it's not just surviving in society, but even if it harms me, where my I want to be so individualistic that I don't want to be tied down to an identity or a gender. Mm-hmm. We see that very much today.
Mm-hmm. And the extent to which materialistic spirit has gone beyond trying to do a little better to live materially better, materialistic spirit is kind of taking us in the wrong direction as well.
Right, it's becoming self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
Where I need to do the things that I need to do. I can drink or take the drugs that are destructive to me as an expression of my individualism and freedom.
Mm-hmm. So tying this into what's missing, talk about the moral qualities of business and commerce, and virtues were only considered virtues to the extent that they favored self-interest. So things like humility and modesty and chastity were replaced by fairness and thrift and utility, and that's part of what is emerging here.
Right. I mean, the virtues, let's say the virtues of the Industrial Revolution and of modern economy have just become practical virtues to the extent that they facilitate business, and then they may be tolerated. But a lot of the virtues that facilitate human relationships, those were downplayed or not considered.
Mm-hmm. And modern marketing teaches us that we need to avoid all suffering.
Yes, exactly. That's part of the book where it talks about how marketing does not exist to satisfy people, but actually to create dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. Because what marketing says is you don't have that and you are unhappy, so you need to buy this. And then when you buy the product, they'll just say, well, you need an upgrade, so you're still not happy, and it creates a dissatisfaction in people and not an actual satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. And a false need sometimes. I think
exactly.
We baby boomers, speaking for myself and my group, are largely
and me as well.
the victims of that belief that there's always something better. 40 is the new 20. This cream will make your skin not be wrinkled. This vitamin will keep you from getting unwell. This optimism about everything, a kind of wishful thinking approach that's there in the advertising and in the movies, and everything's just depicted that way.
Right, and it feeds very much into this frenetic intemperance, which really leads to a non-realistic vision of reality that just it really doesn't exist in real life, and people as a result are very sad and very frustrated with life. This is very much reflected in the mental health of the country. So many people with problems and challenges in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And part of what this book recommends as a solution is a return to the sublime. There's a recognition at some point that not every story has a happy ending, and because of original sin, everybody's capable of wrongdoing and vice and malice, and so there's an issue where we seem to have forgotten our souls in all this.
Right, exactly that. When you only think about your material benefits and your own self-gratification, you neglect the spiritual part of man, which is the most important. When a person is spiritually happy, he's really happy. It really is something much, much more satisfying. And with the emphasis of modern society on the material, people lose that. It's what Thomas Aquinas called acedia. That is a lack of appetite for the spiritual. It just dulls the soul. It doesn't allow the person to really feel that satisfaction that comes from the spiritual happiness that can exist in the world.
And I want to thank you for enriching my vocabulary. I had to look up acedia to make sure I understood it. That was great.
It does exist, yes. I was very, well, in my research, I too also came up with I found a lot of things like that.
Mm-hmm. So the rule of money can be bad, although we don't want to take capitalism all the way out of the picture. We just want to temper it with a spiritual basis.
Right. What I talk about is the rule of money is one thing, but a rule of honor, where a person values spiritual things and where a man's word is, what it is worth something, where his emphasis on those spiritual things naturally brings about a lessening of the rule of money.
Mm-hmm.
When a person has honor, money doesn't mean as much as it does when a person's only thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And quality has more authenticity. And things that are more natural and organic have much more importance to that person.
Uh-huh. Now, the crisis is coming to a head, and we see it in such things as the Occupy Wall Street movement, which you mentioned, but also some of the subcultures and some of the discontent is pointing us in the direction of solutions that you say are not good, like ecological alternatives, like socialism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. I mean, there are, as society becomes more and more chaotic, and we lose a lot of the foundations of our society. There are people who come with false solutions: the ecological solution, the socialist solutions, green solutions. So many like the Occupy Wall Street. These are false solutions. They really don't address the real problem in society.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's. I only have about 3 minutes. I focused too much on the problem and not enough on the solution part. But I really enjoyed the read and reflected on it a lot. So I encourage people to read Return to Order cover to cover, because it is, in fact, very, very well written. But if we're going to revive the heart and soul of the economy, one of the things that you advocate is a return to medieval values. And I suspect that some readers will balk at that and think, well, no, medieval times was the time of the Inquisition and illness and all kinds of horrible stuff. So let's talk about the medieval values a little bit.
We're talking about what I call organic Christian society, and that is a society with natural leaderships, with the links of family, faith, and community that naturally keep an economy and people in order. You can't legislate, stimulate, or regulate an economy into order. You need to use those God-given institutions that naturally keep it in order.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned feudalism, which was another red alert for me, because when I think of feudalism, I think lords of the manor and serfs, and I'm not sure all the serfs were as happy as they might be.
Right. I'm talking about more of the relationships that exist between people, where people help other people, where natural leaderships arise, where role models come help others. It's what actually modern sociologists call representative characters, people who rise to the plate to help others and to help society resolve problems, and not this individualistic type society where we don't get together and we don't practice that heroism that is so necessary.
Mm-hmm. You're, despite the gathering storm, you're an optimist about returning to the wellspring of our values. So let me let you have a little bit of a say about that.
Well, I think it's the only place we can go. When you're in a problem, you naturally tend to go toward an organic Christian society. Even when a person has a personal problem, he naturally thinks of home, goes home, reconnects with his community, addresses himself to God. And I feel that we're like the prodigal son. We've just spent everything, and we're in parties and frenetic intemperance. And that we need to think about the Father's house, because that is where the solution lies.
That's a great conclusion, to talk about the return home as the grand return of the prodigal son after those years of riotous living, and a nice conclusion to the book. We've been talking with John Horvat about his book, Return to Order, where we've been, how we got here, and where we need to go. I encourage all our listeners to get a copy and read it very thoroughly and consider the thoughts therein. This is Good Books Radio, and if you don't hear our 4 broadcasts a week on Public Radio 88 FM, you can turn to YouTube, where we post our most recent interviews at Good Books Radio Strong and Cook. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.